Hi, I'm Mina Malik Hussain, and you're watching The Coffee Table. And as always, we have a fantastically absorbing show lined up for you today. And today we're going to be talking about microfinance and how it's helping women all over the world revolutionize their lives. It's so interesting. It's a sort of thing that one hears a lot about, but I think that it's particularly exciting to kind of delve into the backstage, as it were, of the microfinance scene and just kind of unpack, like, how does it work? What are the dynamics? What makes it so useful and so sort of well suited for women to access this, and how is microfinance, particularly in Pakistan, helping uplift and change women's lives and their families? And I'm so excited to be welcoming on the set today, of course remotely, Ms. Roshaneh Zafar, who is a development activist working in women's economic empowerment. She is the managing director of the Kashf Foundation, which she founded in 1996 as the first specialized microfinance organization in Pakistan. And of course, you can't talk about microfinance and not talk about Kashf. And we are also joined by Mr. Mohsin Ahmed, who is the CEO of the Pakistan Microfinance Network. He has over 10 years of experience in the field and is also a qualified management accountant. Welcome to the show, both of you. This is wonderful. So, Roshaneh, let's sort of, as I like to say, begin at the beginning. What does it mean when we say microfinance? And obviously, micro is small, but then what is microfinancing?
Thank you, Mina, and it's great to be on your show. And I think it's a very pertinent question that you're asking, because people have all kinds of conceptions.
Yeah.
So if we put it very simply, it's about providing women economic opportunities within their homes. Women or low-income families, so what we term as micro-entrepreneurs. And there's several financial products that or services that we offer them. The first one, and the one that is best known, are microloans.
Right.
Microloans provided to low-income families are counter to what you would say are loans provided by commercial banks, for example.
Right.
So in our case, we don't take collateral. So the first difference between us and a regular financial product that commercial banks would offer is the fact that we don't provide collateral. The second thing is that we work with communities and with micro entrepreneurs directly. So they don't come to us, we go to them. We find the micro entrepreneur. And then there's a large amount of work that goes into building the capacity of the micro entrepreneur to use the funds. So it's not transactional. When we look at a typical bank, it's a very transactional function.
Yes.
When we look at microfinance, it's investing in the entire mindset change of the individual who you lend to, and then of the family that you're working with. In addition to that, we also have other services, which includes, for example, savings and insurance. So very quickly, it's about providing micro-entrepreneurs the financial wherewithal to grow their businesses, to grow their micro-business.
No, and I'm really intriguing that you talk about family, and I want to sort of cycle back to that in a minute. But Mohsin, and I think that Roshaneh sort of briefly touched on this and the collateral thing. There is a difference between a commercial bank and a microfinance organization. So other than collateral, is there any other difference as well?
Thank you for inviting me to this show. Okay, so so the big difference, like Roshaneh mentioned, is not just about the collateral, but it is also about working with a very niche market. So where we work is the marginalized segment. It is the woman in the very peri-urban or rural hinterlands. It is providing them loans without any typical collateral.
Yes.
It is actually going to the client and finding them and then providing them with the right kind of lending or saving services. Also, a typical commercial bank, I would again refer to what Roshaneh said. Over there, people come to the bank. Over here, we find and we select our clients. And in that, what is also very important to look at is that in our selection process, we have to make sure, and especially when we are talking about a lending product that we're offering, that particular lending product caters to the cash flow requirement of that client. So we build the cash flows and the financials of an undocumented sector.
Okay, and undocumented. What does undocumented mean? That the sector is undocumented.
For example, when we go to a Chabriwala, when we go to a marginalized farmer, they don't have the books. So we have to, our loan officers have to work with them and construct that what is their income and what is their expenditure, and then see that whether they have the capacity to repay our loan or not. And also, let me tell you that when we work with a particular client and especially lend them, then that client is not the typical very poorest client, because we have to make sure that this client have the capacity to repay also.
Yes. Yes. So is it true, Mohsin, that a micro loan, does one have to, so I assume that the terms of that loan are also different from what a bank would do, and that's why it's particularly beneficial for a micro entrepreneur to approach a microfinance organization as opposed to a bank.
So I really don't know the terms of a typical commercial bank.
Neither do I.
But I would definitely. But definitely, so that the kind of terms that we focus on is, we don't start with knowing that when we are approaching a particular client, we will be looking at the collateral in the form of our biggest risk management function. But what we will do is, we will work with them, as Roshaneh touched, we definitely build their capacity in terms of not only polishing their skills to market their products, but also in terms of understanding that when they are entering into a contract, what is their right and what are their responsibilities. So it's a process of building our client rather than just giving them a loan.
Yes, and then sort of not really caring what you do with the loan, and then repayment is your problem, not the bank's problem, for example, because that's how I sort of seem to understand this, is that when you approach a regular commercial bank, they just give you money, but obviously you tell them why you want it, but then you have to pay it back, and they don't really care how you do it as long as you do it. But it seems like a microfinance organization is one that is then forming this long-term relationship with their client and with the client's family. So, Roshaneh, could you tell me why is it important to kind of build that kind of, to have that kind of rapport, not just with an individual, but with their family? How is family important here?
I'll take that question in a bit. Mina, I want to respond to a couple of other questions that you mentioned. When we talk about the informal economy, it's very important to know that almost 80% of women in low-income communities are involved in the informal economy. So a majority of Pakistan labor force. Let's take the percentage of women in the formal labor force, it's only 20%. So 80% of the women are working as home-based workers across Pakistan, or unpaid agricultural workers, what have you. So we have to recognize that the informal economy or the undocumented economy is a huge chunk of the hidden aspect of how people manage their livelihoods. When we talk about low-income households, the first important thing for us to understand is, and within that bandwidth where we are talking about 80% of women involved, microfinance works in that context. So these are not going to be individuals that you'll automatically see. We have to go and find them, number one. And number two, we have to empower them to be able to take loans and to be able to make financial decisions. So there's a lot of investment in the value chain of entrepreneurship when we go in there. The second thing is, this major difference between us and the commercial banks is that we do graduated lending. The concept is that you start small. So our average loan size is right now in the sector about 45,000 rupees. So we start very small. This is a high volume but small ticket size business. So we are lending to a lot of clients. Currently, the sector has about 7 million clients. We are lending to a lot of clients, but the amount outstanding is small per client. But over time, it's like you graduate the client. So when they take a smaller loan, they get the confidence, they get empowered, they get financial decision making, they see the success factors emerging, and then they move into the second loan, which would be larger. It could be 60,000, 70,000 rupees, and then they keep graduating as the need of their business grows. So we are investing in the long-term health of the entrepreneur. Our purpose is transformation, not transaction. So we are very different in the way we approach our market.
I find it really interesting that, and very important, that the 80% figure that you mentioned, women are already doing some kind of work and making some kind of money from that. And then from what I'm understanding, when a microfinance organization kind of steps in and finds them, then they're actually kind of in a way giving a financial vocabulary to an activity that's already happening, but kind of putting it inside a framework which can then sort of maximize their output, as it were.
Absolutely. And it's also giving them a unique identity. For example, all loans that we make or all deposit services that we provide, you have to have a national identity card as part of the transaction. So women who were undocumented, in a way, we are documenting them and giving them a unique financial identity and saying, well, this is your business. You're the owner. You invest in it. You earn the money. But the point that you raised was very important, Mina, is the economic agency around the loan. So especially from a women's perspective. So you asked about the family. So when we talk about the family, it's important to create a better bargaining position for women within their households. We all know, and ad nauseam, we've talked about this, that we live in a patriarchal world, especially in South Asia. And a woman is a lone warrior, really, against all the stigmas that she has to face in society. Whether it's women like us, Mina, let's admit it, or whether it's a home-based worker who has a small tailoring business or has a small grocery store. She will face levels of the same stigma or social, issues that you and I face also. We have to alleviate those. And that's why it's important to work with the family. It's important to engage them. It's important to make them understand how the role that women play in bringing income to the household, how important that is. And then allowing them to control that income. So to do that, we do a lot of engagement with the men. And I think that is an important piece of the work that we all do.
That is very
crucial. So it's just not about... it's not just about giving money, it's about changing mindset. So this is the war, this is the battle that we are trying to fight.
Yeah, and I want to talk more about this war, but we're going to take a very quick break here and we'll be back in a flash. Stay with us. Welcome back to the coffee table. We're having a fascinating conversation about microfinance and how it's changing women's lives with Roshaneh, Zafar and Mohsin Ahmed. So before the break, Roshaneh, we were sort of at a delicious kind of peak of a conversation here. And I think that it's really interesting here to talk about how women's economic empowerment is a catchphrase that we like to throw around a lot, but it's actually a really complex social situation to deal with, and organizations like Kashf have been doing it for decades now. And recently there was an Australian study that's come out that shows that, and this is an Australian study, so we can't even say, oh, this only happens in South Asian cultures and things. And it showed, and it was a long-term study, so it sort of over time showed that when women began to earn more in a two-income household, domestic violence has increased by a significant amount, because it obviously means that when women begin to earn more or as much or even more than men, then it becomes a social problem there as well. And that's something that I found, I don't know, I guess on one level I wasn't surprised, but it is still disturbing all the same.
You have a point there, Mina, because there was similar research done in Bangladesh by Naila Kabir, for example, which is supposed to be a yardstick to determine how a microfinance is changing women's economic decision making within the household. So what we are talking about here is really the acceptability of women's economic role in the context of a household, or between familial relationships, between the gender relationships, if you want to call it that. So as I was mentioning, also our experience has been that unless or until you invest in the bargaining position of women within their households, things are not going to change. And if she's earning, where is that money going? Who has control over that money? And that's where the what would you call the clash
power
begins
struggle.
To happen. the power struggle happens there, and also where is the loan going to be used. So when the loan comes into the family, money is fungible, and Mohsin touched upon this, that there are times that we may not have clarity on where the money is going to be used, because you may give the loan, you may have a business plan that the entrepreneur is going to invest in, but what if the men in the family snatch that money away and use it themselves? So we have to counter that. Our research is a little different. So what we do every 2 years, we go out there and we research, we ask the men in the family and we ask the women in the family how gender relationships have changed. We talk about financial decision making, we talk about self-confidence, and we talk about domestic violence or violence against women in the household. What we've seen is counter to that. What we've seen is that domestic violence in 40% of the households we fund has come down. And when we checked with men and women, the men said, well, most fights in the household are over money. When my spouse is earning, we don't get into these fights. So it doesn't lead to domestic violence. That's one. And then there's an economic concept known as the opportunity cost of money. What that means is that if you're a victim of domestic violence and you can't work that day, then the money is not going to come from the household. So the moment the woman starts earning, she's viewed as an asset rather than a liability. And that's the dynamic that then begins to change factors like domestic violence, factors like being harassed at the workplace or what have you. So our experience is counter, but yes, we have to be very cognizant that this is a risk, and we work within the context of a certain society. And we must remain aware of that.
So, Roshaneh, do you feel that this is a trend that has developed over time? So when you started out, let's say, do you feel like men in families were more resistant? And now because Kashf has been around, because I'm sure, word of mouth, people know about it, people have more success stories to look at and be like, oh, well, that woman started her own business and they're doing really well. So maybe it's actually okay if my wife does this or my sister does this. Do you feel like it's a trend and it's just been over time it's improved?
Definitely. I mean, in the beginning, there was a lot of resistance to the idea of women's economic empowerment, and it was just not coming from the men, by the way, Mina. We have to remember that as women also imbibe a lot of patriarchy.
Absolutely.
So, our reactions are very much reflective of what society is telling us, even though we may think we are empowered and we have the wherewithal to make decisions. So the same way,
internalized so much.
It was the women who were internalizing it more than the men. So we had to do leadership trainings. We had to make them aware about their own internal capacity and their self-confidence. And then we had to work with the men. So initially, yes, there was resistance. And now, as you correctly pointed out, there are role models. For example, there are communities where children have grown up seeing their mothers taking loans and investing in businesses. So those children are more aware and they have internalized this practice much better. However, when we go into many new communities, it is a struggle, and we have to convince the families and the communities generally. And the way we do that is through a lot of social advocacy. So we do community theater on issues related to women's economic empowerment. For example, just opening getting your CNIC.
Yes.
There are communities where women are not encouraged to do that.
No.
So we go out there and we do these little theater programs, and we bring in the communities and make them aware about the importance of having a national identity card for women. So, these are the kind of things. We also use the media. So we've been doing a lot of drama serials, as you know.
Yes, you have. Absolutely.
On issues related to women.
No, that's interesting. And even something as simple that it seems so simple to have a CNIC card. It's not even just, it's being a legal citizen of a state, and then, and you can have a bank account, you can vote, you can, even something like a COVID vaccine, you can't get without a CNIC card. So it sounds like a small thing, but it's actually a gateway to so many more a sort of more fully realized identity as an individual, really. So, Mohsin, we've been talking a lot about how microfinance organizations work with communities and with families. And one thing that we did mention briefly before the break was about how microfinance organizations also help their clients save. So what's the importance of savings and being aware of how to do savings, like how is it done? And, because do you feel like a lot of times, I think like savings as a concept is one that, do you feel like savings as a concept is something that doesn't come sort of organically to a low-income household because there isn't that much to go around, so you just never think about saving? So I basically like 5 things rolled into one.
Okay, before I respond to this, I will go back to the research also. And I think as an industry level organization, what we have also seen is that there are researches which very typically indicates that some of the empirical evidence is that when women gets loan, one of the key investments that happen is that they send their children for education. Yes. So the number of children going to schools in the family increases. So coming back to this question of saving, I think I would respond to it in 2 ways. Number one, when microcredit started initially as a concept of as a charity concept, not as a social business concept. Right. The first initiatives, the way in rural support programs and even in countries like Bangladesh or Latin America, the focus was that when you set up a group or a community, you should first invest in savings. So savings build your assets and protect you against certain exogenous risks. So that is one of the key as a development initiative. Now,
but sorry to interrupt. But what does it? But what does it mean to invest in savings?
So like you build the capacity of the community to save money on a regular basis and then park that with a commercial bank or an entity which is regulatorily allowed to save that money. And then as communities, you used to have community savings that were parked in a bank account. Number two, as a social business, as a concept, where now we have national financial inclusion strategy. So in 2015, the first Pakistan national financial inclusion strategy was approved by the government. And one of the key focus in that was that you build so one of the key indicators to look was that how many saving accounts had been opened in the country over the next 5 to 7 years. Right. And so the focus was to increase the outreach of saving in your economy. And that has a lot to do with the fact that what we have discussed just a few minutes back. And it is that when you are opening up your account, then you are building up the person's identity. Yeah. That person, once that person has an account, they can have access to a number of other services, not just from microfinance, but from other sources of financing. So you are actually including them into the entire financial system. And I would add to that is in our discussion that one of the key infrastructure, and I'm not just talking about saving right now, but one of the key infrastructure in the financial inclusion or microfinance landscape that has happened is the credit bureau. And what has the credit bureau done is that an individual or a woman who has now a CNIC, now also in that bureau have a 5-year history of their repayment capacity. So you are actually empowering the woman to have access to higher loans or loans from diversified kind of loan products from different entities, and the entities know that what is the overall debt capacity of that person. And so that builds that empowers an individual, or especially because we're talking about women over here, their capacity to be more credit
friendly, reliable,
acceptable to entities.
So what I understand is that when you have good credit or you have a credit capacity, then other institutions or other money lending setups will be more willing to give you a loan, which you can obviously use to kind of further grow your business. So basically, you're sort of building up a credit history as it is, and that's really good.
Exactly, yes.
Great. I'm going to sort of mull over my own credit history and take a very quick break here. We'll be back in a minute. Stay with us. back to the coffee table. We're having a most illuminating conversation about microfinance and how it's benefiting women, particularly in Pakistan, also around the world, with Roshaneh, Zafar and Mohsin Ahmed. So before the break, we were talking about how women use microfinance loans for a variety of reasons. And one of the main things that they use their money and their profits for is putting their kids in school. And that's something that I think we do know, and we've had many conversations about how women's financial independence has almost always translated into the sort of raising of their families' health and security and better futures for their children and for their families. You know, you can eat better, your kids are going to school, you can pay your bills, you know, you're less dependent on anything. And like Mohsin said, you know, when you have savings, you have something to fall back on in tough times. And, you know, one of those tough times to me is very much this COVID pandemic. So Roshaneh, how has COVID affected your micro entrepreneurs and their work over the last year and a half?
Mina, that's a great question, because what we are seeing is that the pandemic has impacted women more inequitably than it has men.
Yes.
Both in terms of the loss of their employment. So the sectors that were most affected as a result of the pandemic were women focused. They were employers of women. Even if we talk about the formal economy,
whether could you give me an example? Schools.
Whether it was beauty salons, whether it was well-being related businesses, anything to do with this kind of a setup, whether it was tourism, whether it was the airline industry, women were the employees of choice there. So what happened is a lot of women were laid off as a result. So if 100 people were laid off, let's say in the Western world, 65% of them were women. That's what we saw as a result of the pandemic. On the other hand, when we look at women's entrepreneurship, the kind of businesses that women run and the kind of businesses that we support that are women-centric, those were also in the non-essential sectors. So about 60% of the business that we fund would be beauty salons, would be tailoring outfits, would be hand embellishment and embroidery businesses where they were making wedding dresses, would be catering businesses or small thela-walas or vending businesses. So a lot of these businesses got affected as a result of the pandemic. And what we saw post the lockdown, 80% of the women entrepreneurs that we had funded, either they completely lost their revenues for the couple of months in the lockdown, or their revenues were curtailed. So now the question emerges, how can microfinance help in this context? Because women's businesses and micro businesses were badly affected. And that's the critical piece. So what we saw was, number one, that businesses needed more capital. That was a no-brainer. You had to come up with loans. Again, you had to come up with capitalization tracks to help those businesses come back. So what happened was, if you take Kashf's case, in the past 9 months, we have recapitalized about 500,000 businesses again as a result of this. To give them loans to help them recapitalize. Then we also saw a certain percentage that wanted what you would call rescheduling. What that means is that they wanted delays in their payment schedules. So we did that. And then the third thing we realized is that women in particular had lost physical access to markets. So the question was, how do you in that case? And so we helped them set up online marketing opportunities. So we trained them on using WhatsApp for business. We trained them on using Facebook for business. We connected the entrepreneurs on a virtual platform to help them transact, whether how to sell their products, where to sell them. So that's an ongoing thing. And another thing that the pandemic did for microfinance in particular is digital financial services. So what's happening now, and that's an interesting thing to talk about, because women with access to internet, women with access to smartphone is going to be a game changer for the society in the coming years overall, and for microfinance in particular.
Yes. And why is that?
Well, because a lot of the transactions are going to be digitalized. What that means is that rather than using cash, you're going to end up with using mobile accounts. You're going to end up with doing transactions over the mobile. And what we've seen in the pandemic is, this was data from the State Bank, that digital transactions have increased by over 125% in the past 9 months.
Wow.
Because of the pandemic.
Yes.
People are relying more on digital transactions. And then again, that means that you are creating a formal footprint for female entrepreneurs. And they will be recognized. Because what happens is what doesn't get counted in the economy, in the formal economy, you never make policies for that. It never gets measured as part of economic change. So then you never consider them. You don't have policies for home-based workers, for example.
Yes.
Which is something we need to do in Pakistan. And in fact, in Sindh, they have promulgated a new law for minimum wage for home-based workers.
No, that's excellent. We've sort of really organically come to what I wanted to ask both of you next, and maybe Mohsin, you can tell me a little bit about this, is that what are the challenges that the microfinance sector does face working in, Pakistan, because this is where we are, and policy is presumably one of them.
Okay, see, and I will go back to your question around how will digital finance help increase the outreach. And I think one of the key is that what we have seen in a number of studies that have happened in terms of women access to finance, and one of the key problems that they face is accessibility or their mobility to, given the societal context in Pakistan.
Right.
So what digital finance will do is, in addition to making things cashless, is the fact that you can do your repayment or you can get your loan using your mobile wallet. And I think that, as Roshaneh mentioned, is a game changer. That what that will do is that will make sure that will help your woman entrepreneur to not go out of their home and repay their loan on a monthly basis or on a bullet payment basis to using any of the mobile channels.
And
now,
it's also probably more, if I may sort of interrupt here, and it's probably a more reliable way to do transactions with your client also. So there's sort of less chance of somebody promising that they'll buy your product and then not paying you as well, because it's just done instantly. So it's probably just kind of a safer way to do business also for a lot of people.
In terms of any snatching of cash or
or just
it adds to the ownership. So about the challenges, I think one big challenge that I see is that what we have seen in the last 15 years since the earthquake in 2005 is that the events that we call exogenous or disasters, they are becoming much more frequent. And given that the overall macro environment in Pakistan is not that conducive to managing disasters, and we now know very well that Pakistan is amongst the top 5 countries that is going to be affected by climate change, which is a reality. So I think for entities to continue to work in a more seamless way, they can manage their own risks, but exogenous factors is something that needs to be supported by the infrastructure that should be made available through the policy or infrastructure investment. So I think a disaster risk fund is one area where investment needs to go into, and whether that requires government support or donor support. So we are talking to the regulators. We have a microfinance consultative group which is chaired by the State Bank as the representation of the Securities and Exchange Commission of Pakistan, which are the 2 regulators of the microfinance sector, and they are fully on board on this. So I think this is one thing that we will want to in the next few years put in place, so that our members, the microfinance organizations, are much more confident about going into areas which are also so that this will help in financial inclusion into geographical areas which are more prone to natural disasters. So I think this is a big challenge that needs to be managed.
No, and that's a really, really interesting connection to make, because I don't think that a lot of people consider climate change and the economy in such a direct way. And we've had shows on climate change before, and it's very clear, even all the statistics that we have show that climate change and climate change related disasters and challenges are doubly and triply harder for women to deal with, and this is a very important connection to make. And Roshaneh, I'm curious about one thing. What role does literacy play in in women doing their businesses as well? Because I'm thinking that if you are, if one is banking through a phone, then you need to be able to have certain literacy skills to be able to even do that. Do you think that's an impediment in when Kashf, for example, goes out looking for clients?
So let me say that literacy is not an impediment in terms of the micro entrepreneur utilizing skills, ability, and their enthusiasm to use the money that we provide them. However, at the same time, you're absolutely correct that it is our social responsibility to educate them. So we invest a lot in the financial education of women. In terms of debt management, in terms of financial management in the household, in terms of savings, in terms of managing contingencies, and in terms of the decisions for investing in the long-term growth of their families, whether it's education, whether it's nutrition. So it is imperative for us to educate them. But when it comes to literacy itself, I mean, the point is, Mina, our educational system is not providing education in terms of giving people modern day skills to compete.
Yes.
So even if people have a matric degree, that doesn't mean that they are really truly educated and they're able to use those skills.
No.
However, that being said, from the human-centered concept of using a telephone and opening a mobile account, we do need to train the women. There is hand-holding that we have to do. So, for example, we have a pilot right now where we've opened about 1,000 mobile accounts for women. And in the initial 2 months, we had to do a lot of hand-holding to teach them how to use the drop-down menus, on how to put in the transaction and all of that. But 2 months in it, they were fine with it. And in fact, they took it on and they were enthusiastic. The other thing we've seen is that in the household, there is going to be somebody who is got internet literacy, who is internet literate or who understands the mobile telephony. So their children, for example. So the young girls that are in the family will help their mothers to use the accounts and the transactions and manage the transactions. So yes, it is an impediment, but no, it's not something that you can't overcome.
Yeah, it's not insurmountable. And from what I understand, microfinance organizations, a lot of your clients are super highly motivated as well. And it sounds like they're just really invested in doing well and wanting to succeed. And it sounds like that they're just really keen to learn these things. And it's just wonderful to see. And one thing that I'm also curious about is that most of your work, all of your work is with low-income households. But when you are talking about things like financial literacy, that's something that could benefit everybody across the board. And do you think that it would be really interesting for microfinance organizations perhaps to run financial literacy courses or a workshop in like schools or in colleges so that more young men and women are sort of learning the vocabulary of how to do this? Because everybody should be financially literate no matter what career you choose to do. Like just because you're not an accountant doesn't mean that you shouldn't know how to sort of manage a business, run your finances, sort of manage your own money. And like particularly for women, I'm thinking, and you talked about contingency plans, and a lot of times women learn these things when something bad happens. But shouldn't this just be part of life skills?
Point, Mina, and we run what we call the Kashf education program. So we actually fund low-cost private schools across the country. We have about 4,000 such schools. Yeah. You multiply that by 100, we have more than 150, let's say. Yeah. We have more than 50 to 70,000 kids that study in these schools. So what we've done in these schools is we have provided financial education training to teachers. And they conduct trainings for children. And the idea behind it is exactly what you're saying, that a majority of these children from low-income communities are going to become entrepreneurs. They won't find jobs in the formal sector. Our economy is simply not growing. If you look at predictions of growth in the economy, that's going to be 1.3% this year, post-pandemic. And our population growth is more than 2%. I mean, we need to do something about population growth. Yes. That should be a topic for your next show. But that being said, it's important to invest in the entrepreneurial capacity of our future generation, and that will come through schools. That will come through colleges. I mean, one of my pet peeves has been that if you look at university enrollment, women far outpace men.
Yes.
So now women are graduating much more as proportionally than men out of our university.
And they're also academically doing better.
They're doing better, but it's not translating into jobs for women.
Yeah.
So we are obviously doing something wrong, and we all need to reflect upon this.
Yes.
This is a bigger problem than you and I are discussing today in this show.
Yeah.
It's, it needs to be resolved.
No, absolutely. And I'm feeling the germs for another show bubbling up in me. Thank you so much, Roshaneh, and thank you so much, Mohsin, for joining me today and this wonderful conversation, which I have found so illuminating. And it leaves me wondering why, as a woman, I wasn't taught how to do any of this, and how so many of us lack a vocabulary to kind of understand our finances and manage them. And it's just something that I feel like it's a life skill for all of us, and it would benefit everybody. And the good economy is good for everybody. And clearly, women being business savvy and having an entrepreneurial spirit isn't just good for them; it's good for families and it's good for societies. And it just sort of unravels in a glorious way. Thank you guys for watching. If you're watching this on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you next time on the coffee table. Bye now.